Welcome everyone to today's session on informing users about book accessibility and features. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this session will be recorded, allowing you to revisit it later or share it with your colleagues. And as a special benefits for EDR Lab members, a written synthesis of this session will be provided, offering valuable insights and case takeaway. I take this opportunity to thank our sponsor for their support, the Iridium Foundation, Glassbox, AudioBoost, and Denmark. Many thanks also to the Fondation Elia, who collaborated on the event accessibility session in the framework of Aldus Hub. Without further ado, let's embark on this journey into the world of book accessibility and metadata. We have two speakers for this session. Let me introduce Gregorio Pellegrino from Fondazione Elia and co-editor of User Experience Guide for displaying accessibility metadata.
And hi, everybody. I would like to introduce my colleague here, Gauthier Chomel from EDR Lab, who is co-editor as well of User Experience Guidelines for display metadata. So there are other co-editors, Charles Laprère from Benetech, George Kirshner from the DAISY Consortium, as well as Avnish from the DAISY Consortium, who is coordinating this work. But for sure, me and Gauthier are the right person here for introducing you to this topic of displaying accessibility metadata.
Thank you, Gregorio. So first, I would like to give some context. And starting with opportunities. At EDR Lab and LIA, we share a common view that every person should have equal access to literature and information, regardless of their abilities, and that we can collectively work towards creating a more inclusive reading experience for all. We see win-win and win opportunities here. First, as a book reader fanatic, I want to find content that fits my needs. Print is great, but not always the best option, as digital provides me with superpowers in the use I make of books for my daily works, for my research project, and for my personal learning attitude. But I am not always sure that the book I am about to buy has print-related pagination, and that I'll be able to share citation with academic colleagues. I also sometimes wonder if I'll be able to read that book with my ears while I'm at the sport club or driving my car. This kind of problem becomes critical for my friends with blindness and my daughter with dyslexia. They don't even know they will be able to just access and understand the content. Will you buy a book if you are not sure that you'll be able to read and use it? Will you do the effort of understanding what the bookseller means with that screen reader activated mention? Does that mean the same as screen reader friendly or works with NVIDIA? Users want an easy and common way to identify features inside a book. Bookseller commercial advantage is to make the experience transparent for users. With my book industry worker hat now, speaking with the publisher members who are producing more and more born accessible ebooks, I want to make sure that the effort done are exposed and rewarded. We want to see the effect of our work. Metadata is known as a hardware understandable for the common of us, but once they are exposed, they become obvious. Who buys an ebook with no cover image? Without metadata and without display rules for them, ebooks are invisible. This image of a book information page on a known retailer web page where only the title, author, and date are displayed speaks by itself. One doesn't know what he is buying. This kind of experience breaks the confidence one can have on bookshop. This is the common experience actually for assistive technology user on about 99% of the book selling platforms. Sure, they prefer a specialized library where they have a long time good experience in browsing, lending, and consuming content. In Europe, this is now becoming a legal requirement thanks to the European Accessibility Act, which requires to provide information on how the service works, and if products are used to provide the service, the links to those products, as well as information on accessibility and interoperability features with assistive devices and facilities. Make them discoverable by providing information through metadata about their accessibility characteristics. Now we have some context. I'll let Gregorio remember us some keys of our history about metadata and information to the user.
Yeah, thank you, Gauthier. Maybe before digging into the overview and history, we may say something about the use of the chat and Q&A in this session for interact with us.
Yes, you can ask your question in the Q&A, and we'll be responding it at the end. And you can also use the chat if you want to add context or information.
Great, thank you. So please use these two tools so we can interact at the end. So let's start with a brief overview and history of accessibility metadata, but more broadly on metadata for digital publishing. So we start with the thing that we have different standards used for different use cases, and this for sure may add a lot of complexity to this work of displaying metadata, because the information about accessibility can arrive to the bookstore or to the online catalog through different channels. So for sure we have ONIX, which is a well-known standard for interchange of book metadata through the supply chain. It is widely used in the printed book sector as well on the digital sector, and it's mainly used for the trade distribution chain. It is an XML structured, and it is separate from the EPUB files. So you can send a ONIX describing a digital publication without having to send the file per se. This is important in two main use cases. One is for sending information before the book is published, for example, for pre-sale. So before publishing the file, you can send information about the ebook. And the other use case is, for example, in the libraries world or in other situations where the file is stored by the distributor, but you send metadata to the different actor in the supply chain, telling that the distributor has that publication available. Then we have schema.org metadata, which are normally metadata embedded in the file. So are metadata inside the EPUB file. So they go together with the EPUB file. And those are really important in all the situations where the distributor or where the reading application has direct access to the EPUB file. One thing that may worth to mention here is that schema.org is a let's call standard, if it's not really a standardized standard, but it's more or less a standard also for communicated information to search engines online for web pages. So it was born for that purpose, and then we use part of schema.org, the accessibility part, for describing the accessibility features and accessibility characteristics of EPUB specific EPUB publications. Then we have MARC, and we have two different versions of MARC. One is MARC 21, which is text driven, and the other MARC is UniMARC, which is based on XML. And MARC is a format standard used mainly in libraries. So really focused on categorization and on the publication, less focus on the commercial part, so price, sales rights, and all that. So all those three different standards can have accessibility information. We are working on a mapping. We will speak about that lately, but for sure, it's complex to derive all the accessibility information from those three and to display to the end users. So one important thing that we would like to highlight is that we think that machine readable metadata are really, really important in all those standards, because machine readable metadata, and with machine readable metadata, we mean metadata that can be interpreted by machines, can be localized, so can be translated in different languages. You can have a book in Italian, but then sell that book in France, and you can have the accessibility metadata in French, which is meaningful for the end user. So can be localized, can be filtered. In a catalog, you can filter all the books that have print page numbers inside, for example, or or that have alternative text or whatever. Can be automatically checked for being sure that the metadata represents what you actually have in the EPUB file per se. Can partially be automatically calculated, and we will speak about that lately, on how there are some experiments to extract metadata directly from the content, and can be used for statistics for sure. So with in mind these three different standards and the machine readable metadata, there were some pioneers who started to display accessibility metadata before the user experience guidelines and before the requirements by law. In this slide, you can see different screenshots of different websites where some information on accessibility is displayed. As you can see, every different website used different terminology and different way to inform the user. And for this, we see that a standardized way for displaying metadata may be useful. And Gauthier will speak about that in few minutes. So here there are some examples from French websites. Some are really well known, and other examples from Canada, where we have NELS, and from the US, where we have Bookshare. As well as an example from LIA. LIA founded the catalog of accessible books in 2011, and we started to display accessibility metadata since then, because in our process for doing quality assurance of book, we produce metadata for the publisher for describing the accessibility of the book. And for doing this work late in 2011, we worked a lot with Editor, who is the organization that develops the ONIX standard, to have a lot of different codes and to express the different characteristics of the book. And this is really important to the users, and we also distribute this information on other platforms, at least in Italy, like Media Library Online, that display the LIA logo on their books, book pages, so the user can know that a specific book was checked by LIA, and if the user click on that LIA logo, it opens a page where it is listed all the information about that specific book. And this is important for the users, because before buying or borrowing a book, it has to understand if that book really fits their needs. So with all those things in mind, standards, the pioneers, we started in 2021, maybe a little bit before, but we published in 2021 the user experience guide for displaying accessibility metadata. This was published within the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, by the publishing community group, which is an open group and free to participate. This document, this specification, is important because it was the first attempt to describe in some way how to get information from the accessibility metadata standards, really structured, really technical, and display in a user-friendly way to the end users. And the document is divided into principles that are independent of metadata standards, so that really express what are the key information that we want to tell to users. And then we have techniques that tells how to extract the information from specific standards and display as described in the principles to the end users. But then after this work, we understood that maybe we had to improve this guide, and this was an important work that we did, gathering feedbacks from the end users. And on this work of feedbacks, I leave the floor to Gauthier.
Thank you, Gregorio. So first, I would like to remind everyone that traveling with a power adapter is not fun at all. I have like 10 of them at home, as I always forget which one fits here and there. Some of them traveled with me so many times, but have never been used. And you know what? I can buy a book, an ebook, anywhere in the planet from my home. And I don't want to learn about geographic or super company standards for a 10-minute shopping hack. That's why the working group asked for feedbacks of implementers. And that's why with Gregorio, we are looking at what's happened in the world and try to speak with everyone with a project about informing users about book accessibility features. We take time to follow up national and company projects to guarantee homogeneity at the end. We want to make sure our recommendation at the end will work for you. Do you have a related project? If yes, so let us know. We want your feedback to keep editing and make sure we provide the best information for you. We'll now give two examples we know well, two project examples, France and Italy. So in France, the project started in late 2020 and will be extended to late 2024. The subject is a key point of the strategic plan of the Interministerial Steering Committee for the development of a range of digital books accessible to people with disability, and IDEA Lab has been asked to lead this work. So far, the project involved 54 persons from 30 organizations representing all the book value chain, including associations representing print disabled persons. I will never stress enough that the user is part of the ecosystem. We've worked with prototypes, we've organized workshops, we've made a national survey on localized vocabulary to use, because translating screen reader friendly was not working in French. And we work with book selling platform providers to build proof of concept. All this work is used for a French recommendation that is actually alimenting the work at the V3C, and obviously will be updated to be aligned with the international recommendation. You can check our prototypes and iterations on the project dedicated website. And as we are IDEA Lab, we want it to be usable by anyone. All contents are under free GPL and open source CC BY licenses. So feel free to reuse it. You just have to understand or translate French. One point I want to focus on is the work done for the vocabulary study, because the question, how would you want to get informed that this ebook is readable with your assistive technology, does not work. We had to dive into writing use cases and building example. Here on the screen, we have the display transformability concepts, which use case states when you are reading, you want to modify characters, font, and size, as well as spaces to make your reading comfortable with your materials and reading conditions. There's a pretty unfoldable detail elements that let you know more if you want. There you'll find a GIF showing option for text display in Thorium, along with a long definition and more precision. As you can see, we took an inclusive approach with use cases for everyone, not targeted to a specific group of users. I will not comment here the result of the survey. They are publicly available on the project website, and I'll be happy to discuss them with you during an email or Zoom coffee break. Gregorio, will you give us some insight on the Italian approach?
Sure. So in Italy, we did a kind of similar work. We made 2 focus groups with visually impaired users to identify their needs when it comes to information about accessibility of publications. And we understood from those focus group that users normally download the free samples that are available sometimes on some online bookstore. They download the free sample, they dig into the free sample with the assistive technology to check if the free sample fits their need. And so if it's okay for them, they buy the book. If it's not okay for them, they don't buy the book. But this action is quite expensive from a time point of view, and also maybe also simplified if they had the information before downloading the book per se. Also, because in some occasions you don't have access to the sample book. For example, on libraries platforms, you cannot download a free sample before borrowing the book per se. So they say that as information about accessibility will be really, really important for them. And for them, 3 things were important. 1, to have clear accessibility information. The second one is to have them in a concise manner, so short one, but also having a description to better express what is meant by the short version. For example, in the short version, you may have something print page equivalence numbers present, and then a description telling this means that for each printed page, you have the equivalent number in the ebook, blah, 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 and you can navigate that as it is a printed book. So in our internal research, we identified 3 important directions for presenting metadata in a meaningful way. One is to group similar metadata in a short form. The other one is to explain in simple words what that short form means. And then the third one is to present metadata in a similar way on different platforms, because the users don't want to learn different ways on how information about accessibility is displayed on different platforms. They want to go in one store or another store or an online library and to always get the same information about a specific book. And for that, we figure out some way to do that, and we developed some mock-ups to check if this information can fit in already well-known websites. Here, as you can see in this screenshot, we try to put some icons and short version of accessibility information on some web pages, and also having a longer description for displaying those metadata. And this work was really important because when we discussed with a lot of implementers, they told us that was impossible to fit all this information in few pages, in few space. And with this work of mockups, we understood that actually it was possible, and so we moved working on that. So after the work of feedback done both in France and in Italy, and after working with other national working groups, as Gauthier mentioned, from the Netherlands, Canada, UK, Germany, we put all this knowledge in the publishing community group in the World Wide Web Consortium. And the idea was to start a new version of the user experience guidelines, which is something we are working right now, to improve those guidelines to fit the needs of international at the international level. And this work is really important because think about big companies, multinational companies that work on different countries, different markets. They cannot implement different guidelines, one per each country, but they need an international standardized way that they can get and implement in each country. For sure, localizing, so translating the words, but the same structure. And the first thing we start with was identifying how to group metadata. And this part of grouping metadata was important because we have more than 40 different values for expressing accessibility of ebooks, and 40 different values are really a huge number. Think about that. Normally metadata for selling an ebook are title, subtitle, the description, the price, the author, the format maybe, that's all. So less than 10, kind of that. While only for accessibility, more than 40. So we try to figure out a way to group these 40 metadata in a semantic way, so similar information grouped, and to identify for each group a name, which then can be localized in different languages, and a description that eventually can be based on the metadata. And now I leave to Gauthier to express the flexibility of this work.
Thank you. So we know that not everyone will have the same space on his website, on his platform to display this information, and not every retailer or library will want to provide the same level of information, and we recognize and respect that. That's why we are thinking about making example provided as extended or separated sentence and compact or in one sentence. One example here is about navigation. We think that one could want to give very detailed information about navigation possibilities, and we'll use some separated sentences, like contains a table of content that provide direct access to all chapters of the text via link. Index provide links to item references. Landmarks provide quick access to main part of the book. And there are references to link page in the paginated version. But one another may find that it's too much information and may want to have a very short sentence because it has already many things displayed on his web page. So this one could use a one sentence example, which is a concatenated form, navigation by table of content, index, landmarks, and page list. And last but not least, we also imagine that one could make the choice to combine the two approaches with a pretty detailed element. Today, it's possible to display one sentence, and if you want to know more, you can let the user free to display more information. So this is how we are thinking to make sure that the guidelines we are establishing will fit not an average need, but better saying extremes needs, because places to find books are very different, and this has to be reflected, and we have to make that possible.
Yeah. And so this work is running right now in the W3C. So if you are really interested, and if you are really a nerd of accessibility metadata, please join the community group. we had a great discussion on how to inform users on accessibility. We had a meeting yesterday on this. One thing that is important for us is that the W3C process for publishing documents is based on consensus. So all our work in W3C is not a top-down work where we define specifications and the supply chain have to implement those, but we are gathering continuous feedback from different supply chain actors like distributors, e-commerce publishers, and all that, so that we are working on raise awareness among all stakeholders. And for that, a super important work was to involve editor on this work. Editor did not participate to the first version of the user experience guidelines, did not participate to the work, while now is part of the working group. And I think this is super important since ONIX is one of the major standards used for producing accessibility metadata. And so their work within the community group is really valuable. And this was thanks to the strong relation that both IDEAR Lab and LIA has with editor. And this has some side effects on an important update of ONIX, but we will speak about that later. And we would like to arrive to an updated version of the user experience guide for displaying accessibility metadata by the end of this year. So if you are planning to display accessibility metadata on your website, please wait for the new version, because we'll change a lot from the version that you see right now on the website. And if you want to have some insights, please join the community group so you can feel what we are discussing, but wait for the new version, because will be a game changer for the whole supply chain. And what are the side effects of all this work, Gautier? Because there are some important ones.
Yeah. We started our journey thinking about the correct structure and wording to inform users about accessibility of ebooks, but on our way we realized that it was more than that. We've seen side effects, some were expected, some less expected, and we think that they are sufficiently important to be taken in account. Let's see some of them. First, from user with print disability perspective, we received a lot of comments during the survey about vocabulary. The one from Leticia, a person unable to read printed books, summarized them in my point of view. So Leticia told us what a pleasure it is to be able to buy a digital book and read it whenever we like, without having to go through a lengthy and very expensive transcription process. And even if we don't necessarily have the pleasure of touching the book, the paper, turning the pages, smelling it, at least we can read what we want, when we want, at the same price as anyone else. I strongly emphasize here two parts of the message: able to buy a digital book and read it whenever we like, without having to go through a lengthy and very expensive transcription process. Second part, enlightened by me, is we can read what we want, when we want, at the same price as anyone else. I think this is what we want to make sure that user gets in the future, and that's very important for us. So yes, this work raises users' awareness. Many of them with or without disability discovered rich reading experiences. But we've also seen that enhancements are possible, notably in specialized reading materials and assistive technology. They are also part of the ecosystem along with the users. And so we started discussion with them in a common shared view of empowering readers with cool reading features. I want my blind friend able to tell me to check the page 67 of a book I have in print. On publisher size, we see that efforts are already enlightened. The screenshot here shows the difference of information provided in the About This Book page in Thorium. One has nothing, not even a cover, not even a title. The other is very rich with title, author, date of publication, publisher, language, cover, and accessibility informations. Of course, this accessibility section information in Thorium will be updated with the release of the new version of the display guide. We'll make sure that you'll get the same information here as you'll get on your retailer website. But before being able to check that in Thorium, I was adding an about section at the end of each of the book I produced. Well, I still do that, but it's now much easier to explain what this strange meta name, schema, accessibility feature, content, alternative text line added in the OPF stands for when we deliver trainings or speak with our fellow publishers. That's for the book publishers, producers. Today, they can check in their daily work what happened, what is displayed in a reading interface. But what about persons who have in charge the Onyx record for distribution? They don't always have the technical knowledge that have the production team. So for them, we reuse the use case of our survey in France, and we built a dictionary of metadata with condition and definition. Example, your book has a printed version. If the answer is yes, in the digital book, is it possible to identify and reach the start of a page as it is in the print version? If the answer is yes again, so please add list 196 code 19 to your Onyx record. As easy as possible. We start to see, and we expect more side effects on data available. So actually, in Italy, thanks to the work done from long time by LIA, they have 30,000 ebooks with accessibility metadata available. The state in France is a bit different. When we started our project in 2020, we had 650 books with accessibility metadata in Onyx. In 2023, now we see near 4,000 accessibility information in Onyx. Still, it is only 1.1% of the title available. But this could change quickly. We've seen that today the Regium Go Toolkit inference and deletion rules could help to make a big shift very quickly. Actually, the max is 82% of title with accessibility features in France. So we could jump in less than 1 week from 1% to 80%, quite easily, thanks to the work done. And just to stress here again that Regium Go Toolkit is also an open source software, so anyone can use it to prettify its Onyx records.
Yeah, another important side effect was about Onyx. So as you may know, there was old version of mapping between Onyx and schema or EPUB metadata that was not really in line with the latest version of those standards, but also there were some codes that cannot be expressed in both standards. So Fondazione LIA and editor worked with IdeaLab, and together we helped this improvement of the mapping. That means also on the Onyx part to add some new codes to better describe some accessibility features. And this is strategic to be sure that we can express the same information on accessibility on different standards. And one thing is, if you are on the Onyx side of the distribution channel, please pay attention to the next release that should have a lot of improvements on codes for describing accessibility. And will not end here the work, but for sure the next release will be a super game changer for the whole industry for displaying accessibility metadata. And I personally would like to thank Graham and Chris from Editor for the huge work that they did for improving the mapping and improving the accessibility description of Onyx. But we still have some open issues or things that we would like to maybe address after the publication of the new version of the user experience guidelines. The first one is quality of metadata. We, as Fondazione LIA, see a lot of publications with wrong metadata inside, missing metadata, or metadata that are telling things that are not present in the publication, like the metadata says we have MAFML, but then there is no MAFML in the publication, so no formulas in MAFML. So I think we have to find some way to check the quality of metadata, maybe to calculate some values automatically, as the experiment of DeMark tries to do with inferring information, and to find a standardized way to calculate those values, what it means to automatically calculate, for example, print page numbers. There may be different approaches. And then list, we understand that this matter is quite complex. We have at least 3 different standards, a lot of more than 40 values, a lot of languages. So we foresee maybe the development of open source tool to help online bookstores, online catalogs, online libraries to extract accessibility information in a structured way, ready to be displayed to the end user. And I think that we are there, Gauthier.
Yes, thank you. So we are open to any question. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature. We still have 5 minutes here for engaging the discussion.
We have a question by Ted, which I think is for you, Gauthier, which is the SNE dictionary that you displayed before available in English?
No. But it's open source, so one can translate it. But there also, I will wait the release of the new version of Onyx, because we might have significant changes there. And we've provided this work to Onyx too, so maybe it will not be so of use in the incoming times. What Onyx will is new code list, but they will also release maybe later, because it takes time, a new guide on how to use and inform accessibility using Onyx. So maybe this work will not be of use. It's more, I think it was interesting, important for as a proof of concept, and as showing what is needed on the side of who set up the Onyx records. But still, it's really free, so feel free to reuse it for any project you want. And just maybe one precision: it's not SN dictionary. It's really been produced by IDEA Lab. So there's inside inputs from the SNE, of course, but there's also others input inside. It's more a work that we should credit to the French steering committee, interministerial steering committee, which is a particular form we have in France to address the implementation of the directive, where we get all ministries involved and many players of the scene. So we've realized it as IDEA Lab, but the mandatory was from this collective, this steering committee.
Yeah, and Laurent suggests to use DeepL, the tool for translating from French to English, or maybe since is TED to ask maybe directly in Dutch. Then we have another question or maybe suggestion from Filippo. Filippo is from Filippo Floridia, who is from Italy, from Mondadori, the biggest publisher in Italy, telling that he hopes that online retailers will start to implement the accessibility metadata spec soon. For sure, that is quite important. In Italy, we have a lot of metadata, and we cannot wait to display this information to the end users, because it will be a huge information also to, as Gauthier told, to express the commitment of publishers on accessibility. We know that 70% of the production of Mondadori is checked as accessible, which means more than 16,000 ebooks. So really a huge number. I think maybe the biggest catalog of a big group available, at least as accessible, at least in Europe. And then we have a question about Robert, telling if there is an open source tool which can extract EPUB OPF metadata and remap into the ONIX accessibility fields. So I'm not, I don't think it's available a tool like that right now. We know that there are two tools that can extract accessibility metadata from files. One is ACE by Daisy. If you run ACE by Daisy and you get the, I'm going a little bit technical, but and you get the JSON report, you can, well, as well as in the UI in the application, you can have all the accessibility metadata there. And the other tool is the Ridium Go toolkit. Maybe we can put a link in the chat, which is open source, that can extract and in some case infer metadata from the file. But we don't have tools right now to do the mapping automatically. We developed one internally in Fondazione Lia, but we foresee that in the near future, we may develop that maybe within the World Wide Web Consortium or the DAISY or IDEA Lab, some big international organization. And this is really important, not only for the mapping, but also for checking that the two information on ONIX and in the file are consistent. Because potentially you can express two different things on using different standards, so that are consistent and that are consistent with what is present in the publication.
Yes, that's always tricky to automate things. So things can be done, but it's also very important to be wise and take time to explore the possible side effect and false positive and this kind of things. On the Ridium Go toolkits side, this is an open question we have at the Ridium Foundation. Do we implement a plus to this one? This one is to be used by a reading system at first, but we could build other tools among it. It could be at the Ridium Foundation, but it could be also anyone who wants to provide that reusing the toolkit. So it's really an open question. You know, open source is always about resources, and resources is not only money, it's also people with competencies here to work with us in the long term. So
great. I don't see other questions, nor in the Q&A nor in the chat, so I think we have done.
yes, perfect. Many thanks to everyone for your participation and your great questions. Special word for Laura Brady, who joined us from Toronto, and it must be very dark outside for you. So many thanks to be with us today. And we hope to see you all in 2 hours for the next session. Bye.
Bye-bye.